Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for sitting with me today. We want to talk about reversals and escalations, in Israel, both in biblical times and today. And I particularly think of the prophet Jeremiah, prophesied for 40 years. And one of the kind of judgment prophecies was there will not be a sound of a bridegroom and a bride and so on. But then it changed.
Yeah. So I think that, the whole theme of reversals goes across the scriptures. Like I can think about Joseph, stripping him of his garments, and he was, cast into a pit. Finally, and then again he's stripped again when the wife of Potiphar rips his clothes off, and he's thrown again into a pit, into a prison, and then finally he's pulled out of the prison and he's given these royal garments and, the garments of a king. And so the story of Joseph is very much a story of reversal, and it's all about God fulfilling his promises. He had this dream, and the whole story of Joseph is about God is going to fulfill this dream because it was from God. And, I think about, studying the book of Esther.
I was just thinking of Esther.
Yeah, the book of Esther is all about reversals. It's really an amazing story of, how God reverses all the plots that Haman had plotted against our people, and God undoes everything. And you have this one, I think one of the most dramatic reversals in the book is when Mordecai, he finds out about the decree against all of the Jewish people. And it says that he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and then he says that he cries out and wails a great and bitter cry. And the irony there is that's actually a citation from Genesis 27 when Esau lost the blessing to Jacob, which is interesting because you have that conflict between Jacob and Esau. Amalek is a descendant of Esau. And so you have this terrible reversal, and it's painful to see the situation. So he's crying out and he's wailing, and there's terrible mourning. But then after Haman is hung, it says that he goes out from the king dressed in royal garments, and he's like a king, and it says that there's great joy and rejoicing all throughout the kingdom. And so again, this whole notion of, Mordecai was headed for a cross. He was supposed to be hung on a cross. The Aramaic translation says that, it
describes the tree as a cross.
To crucify.
Interesting.
Right? To crucify, I think the Aramaic is to crucify Haman. They crucified Haman, right? But that was supposed to be, Mordecai was supposed to be crucified, right? But God reversed the story in such a way that the enemy was destroyed, and we go from terrible bitterness to great rejoicing. Again, on the theme of escalation, what's really beautiful is that whatever God did that was really good for us in the past becomes a picture of what God's going to do in the future, but even better. And so the Exodus, and so God comes and he fights against the Egyptians. He fights on behalf of our people, and he splits the sea for them. And they come out of Egypt with the riches and the treasures of Egypt, right? Well, if you look at Zechariah 14, when the Lord comes to fight for us, the Messiah, and he stands on the Mount of Olives, it says that the Mount of Olives splits in two for the people to part through. So that's a new Exodus.
That's interesting. I didn't think about it this way. Yeah.
But it's
same language.
It's the same exact language. And there they plunder and they get the gold and the silver. But there, it's an even greater Exodus because at that point the Messiah establishes his kingdom. It says in Exodus chapter 12 that we're supposed to eat the Passover in haste, rushing out of Egypt. But in Isaiah's new Exodus, right before he introduces the servant of the Lord in Isaiah 53, it's in Isaiah 52 verse 12, it says that you will not go out in haste. In other words, the point is that it's going to be...
The reversal is better.
It's an escalation, that the new Exodus is going to be far greater and far more powerful than the first Exodus. And so we are a people, and it's not because of us, it's because of God, but we are a people that God constantly reverses our situation, turns things around, or gives us far better than he already gave us in the past. And I think to me, one of the greatest modern reversals is, 3 years after the Holocaust. I mean, how do you explain 3 years after the Holocaust? We lost 6 million of our people. We had nothing. And God, out of the ashes, raises up a nation. It was a resurrection from the dead. And so, if anybody ever sought evidence that the God of Israel is a real God, the reestablishment of the state of Israel is one of the greatest modern miracles. It's one of the greatest miracles of all times. But again, it's a reversal.
Yeah, including the Hebrew language. And it makes me think about my late grandparents. They came here in the early part of the 20th century. And, they say, and it's very much in line with ancient reports, there was really not a whole lot going on here, particularly the part that the Jewish people resettled in the, not the ancient cities, but rather the coastal area and so on. It was all swamps, and they drained the swamps, and they built, towns and all those kind of things. Today, the coastal area of Israel is populating 70% of the population of Israel. It's the most advanced, and the Silicon Valley of Israel is right here. And so, again, after a lengthy period of time, almost 2,000 years of no inhabitants in the vast majority of the land, certainly not Jewish, once again the impossible happens, as you allude to. And it's to some degree true in your family as well.
Yeah, so we lost, on my mom's side, part of the family left Poland in the early 1900s, but the rest of the family stayed. And of the family that stayed, all my mom's aunts and uncles and cousins, they were murdered, except for one cousin who left in 1932. He left Poland, Warsaw, to box in the Jewish Olympics, the first Jewish Olympics. He went back to Poland, came back again to box in the second Jewish Olympics, and stayed.
In the United States?
No, he was in Poland, and he left.
Oh, where did he go to? Where was
he came to Israel, to the Jewish Olympics.
I didn't know he was here.
Yeah, he was a featherweight boxer.
No kidding.
And so he boxed the first Jewish Olympics. He came back the second Jewish Olympics. Then he stayed. And the family in Poland, his mother said, "What, are you crazy? Come back, come home." But he said, "Mom, I want to be a pioneer." And so he stayed. And as it happens, he was the only family member that survived from Poland. But he built the country. He came to build the country with his hands. And then, I think about my immigration. I mean, coming back to Israel back in the early 90s. And I think for me, one of the most amazing things was to see, just to see a thriving country. I mean, I had never been to Israel up until I was 22 years old. And I came to Israel and I'd heard plenty of things. And just to see this incredible thriving country, it was so overwhelming. And I'll never forget the day that, I had this discussion with Victor Smadja, and just a great man of God. And we started talking about, Israel. And he looked at me and said, "Seth, you're Jewish. You belong here." And I hadn't even, it was like I hadn't even, up until that moment, I hadn't considered staying. I came here to study at Hebrew University. And I walked out, and for the next half an hour, I couldn't stop weeping. It was just this overwhelming sense that I could be a part of a modern miracle. Like it was literally just a modern miracle. And so I've never looked back since. And anyway, I feel honored. It's, the thought of even being able to, I studied biblical Hebrew before I came to Israel. Learning modern Hebrew, it took me a little bit of time, but the thought of even being able to communicate and think and talk in Hebrew, I don't ever take that for granted, because I realize it's a gift. It's something that God gave to our people. And it just, again, evidence that the God of Israel is a real God. He's a true God, and He's a faithful God.
Amen. Soon, our book, Walking the Walls with Nehemiah, is going to come out. We hope it's going to be a blessing to many. Now, among the different things we discuss in the book, leadership lessons and things we can learn in terms of character, we also look at how the exiles that came back from the first temple diaspora in Nehemiah's time had built a wall that was the basis for the population of the city of Jerusalem and ultimately the land of Israel. and eventually became the background for the Messiah's first coming to Jerusalem and this land and the world. But now we're living in a period where we get to be part of this miracle, as you called it, of God gathering the Jewish people back to this land. And the parallel would be, or the escalation would be, a preparation for the return of the Messiah the second time.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting because if you think about the escalation here, and Paul actually touches on this. He talks, what a blessing to the world that the Messiah came the first time. The first return from exile, and then a couple hundred years later, the Messiah was born. How much greater a blessing will it be after this second return when the Messiah comes again? And Paul puts it in Romans. He says, if talking about the rejection of the Jewish rejection of Yeshua, he says, if their rejection is blessings to the world, and I'm paraphrasing, how much more will their acceptance be, right? And so we're looking at a time of incredible escalation, and this expectation of the Lord's return.
And it's not ethnocentric. It's not about Israel, it's about the God of Israel. Through the blessing of Israel, the world will be blessed. And that's, I think, the key point.
It's interesting how people tend to be, you look at the tragedy of anti-Semitism, and one of the craziest things, or the absurdity, it's almost like a self-hatred. The world hates itself because God has chosen the Jewish people to bring blessing to the world. And there's something incredibly suicidal and crazy that the world hates us so. It's kind of like the world gathering around to spit in the well of water of blessing. But nonetheless, in God's greatness and His goodness, right? God is determined to use us for blessing. And so, yeah, we see, I think to the extent that we see that anti-Semitism growing and the hatred growing, I think to that extent our expectation rises that God's going to do something, soon and very soon.
Amen. And so we're waiting for the revealing of the Messiah the second time. Thank you so much, Seth. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.